Good evening. Today is February 23rd, 2021. This is the regular meeting of the Board of Education. I have a motion to approve the minutes of the February 9th, 2021 regular meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Any comments, corrections? All those in favor? Motion passes. We have time for a report from the superintendent. Albert?
Hi, good evening, everyone. I first want to say that it was nice that we had a day without any complications in the schedule after last week was, quite a challenge. And I just wanted to remind or point out that there are some, difficulties associated with the scheduling model, with how the timing of the day falls out and with the weather. So, that has been, it's not as straightforward when all of the superintendents across the county discuss. Every school is operating in a little bit different fashion. So sometimes there's a little bit more variability in that. But that actually begins very early in the morning, around like 3:30, we start like monitoring the situation, and then those calls link together. So I was just glad today that I pretty much went to sleep last night knowing that I didn't need to be on it at 3:30, but I was anyway. So that has, been, I just wanted to acknowledge all of that. Secondly, I did share with the board, and I have an update about the vaccination levels in the district. And the interesting thing about that is I had been keeping track of the vaccination levels for our district from the very beginning, since actually early January, when we found out on January 9th that some appointments were being made available to the 1B. The state is now going to be asking requiring all school districts to report vaccination levels and requiring teachers to inform, not to require vaccination, but just to let us know. So they're going to be tracking that. So that is additional, excuse me, that is additional data that we will be sharing. And I have been recording that. So as of today, for total employees, we are just about at 175 that I know of for vaccinations. And we are now being supported very well by the county in that they're giving us guaranteed reserved appointments on a regular basis. Usually around 15 of those appointments. In addition to that, Nuvance provided us with 20. So in the past 2 to 3 weeks, we've had almost 60 reserved appointments made available. So we are now in the position to be looking at our substitute teachers and our coaches. So we're being able to connect those individuals with vaccinations. And I'm very happy about that we're in really good shape with that. Later on in the evening, the principals will be talking more about the survey data, and I will be referencing it as well. But one of the themes that you'll hear, we're all very eager to have the students back into school. This is the pretty much the central topic at every one of those weekly meetings that we have with the Department of Health. Much of those decisions are done at the local level, local health departments. We are aware of the variability that's happening across the state. We've asked our health department to work with those health departments in other regions of the state, to provide us guidance. But that is something that is discussed on a regular basis. And I'll talk more about that when we get to the survey section as well. I wanted to recognize as well the I would say really good success of the athletics approach and the protocols that are being followed across the section. I think the section has done a good job of establishing and supporting that. And to have the kids with those activities, I think is a good move. I think we'll see there are going to be some middle school activities starting up in the next month. Is that accurate, John? The next month? And so that'll be.
Sorry, Albert. They'll be starting tomorrow.
They'll be starting tomorrow into next month, which is really good. And all of those opportunities to have the students, together, the social aspect cannot be underestimated with that. And then the bulk of the rest of my update is going to come in the form of reviewing the survey data that we shared with the families and the students and the staff of the district, and with the budget presentation. So tonight we are going to be doing part 2 of that presentation. And what I'm very pleased to report is there's been very rich conversations about programming and about future and thinking and vision as we develop that process with each of the administrators who supervise those sections of the budget. And that as has been a new experience, but a very positive one, because we are able to discuss programs and have, schedules for all of our planning purposes. So I'm very proud of where we are with all of that. And that is my report.
Thank you. Any questions for Albert? Seeing none, we'll move on to board committee reports, performance monitoring. Those are mine. So we invited Dr. Davenport and Isabel Usowitz to explain a little bit more about Naviance, how the district is using it, and what the plans are for the future. So the future included more Naviance training, integrating guidance counselors to enhance student course sections, increase parent awareness and participation, and have students set goals and opportunities for growth. Next, we discussed various policies. First one was on graduation requirements. So we thought students participating in programs such as skills and achievement commencement credentials should have a clear understanding of what it takes to graduate, whether they should graduate with their peer class or when they graduate the program. Albert is going to do a little bit more research, see what other districts are doing, but we think it's important to give parents and guardians as much notice as possible so there's no surprises. Next, we discussed transgender and non-binary student and staff. Decision was that we needed more guidance from gender facility support from the New York State Education Department and legal counsel before we can make any more enhancements there. Next one was homebound instruction. Albert's going to work with administrators to enhance the homebound instruction policy and present it to the board. Our last topic was the capital project. Tom informed the committee that there were no funds left over for the capital project due to accounting differences resulting from the allowance being used. But several of Sheldon's punch list items that he discussed were included in the capital project and were finished. Anybody have any questions? Megan?
I was curious about the services for our transgender and non-binary students that are pressing right now that we're awaiting state guidance on.
Do you want me to answer that?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, so we have been very, there's been a lot of good work, and I'm glad that the principals are here. They can speak more specifically to the buildings if you'd like. As far as the single-use restrooms, that has been able to happen very easily. The more complex is the change room facilities. So the locker room facilities and the modifications that can be done there. Because one of the challenges is that if you still only have 2 facilities for students, you're not legally, with the passage of the human rights law, you're not legally able, or you cannot require somebody to disclose their identity if they choose not to. And so having the 2 creates a binary situation, which is somewhat problematic for gender nonconforming or gender fluid students. So we need more guidance there. Some of the at the college level and actually at some secondary school level, there has just been the increasing the number of private change areas in the facility. So it's not a single one, because then the use of a single, if you have a single area in a locker room, for example, that does not provide reasonable protection of one's own choice to use that. So one of the solutions to that is having facilities redesigned to have many more private change areas so that there can be some flexibility there. But that law was signed in December of 2020, and it hasn't gotten a lot of coverage, for obvious reasons. There are many other issues happening all around, but it is a significant one. And I raised it at one of the advocacy meetings with one of our state lawmakers, because I feel that this is something that we're going to need a little bit of support in creating the spatial modifications that we need to make for the students. But it has more to do with the change facilities. We are in really good shape with the restroom facilities.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Next is the winter survey summary. Albert, do you want to do an introduction and get us going?
Sure. We had made a commitment to regularly assess and get feedback from the various stakeholders in the community. And I'm going to share my screen. Just oops, wait, I need to Okay, sorry. So what I'm going to show you is a very broad overview, a very, very broad overview of the differences between the fall survey and what I'm calling the winter survey. So, you know, I think looking at the trends over time is very important to see that data. You know, we had relatively, I would say, strong responses, about 489, you know, family responses. So I'm going to be sharing that the broad trend, and then the principals are here tonight to talk a little bit more about the text, the anecdotal information that families shared. There was lots of feedback that was shared. So this first slide, it is an important one because we had, you know, one in the fall survey, it's in the bottom, this bottom left corner. This was what we opened with, about 16%. This number isn't accurate. This is of survey respondents, but it's very close to accurate. We had about 18%. But if you look at the increase in remote numbers, particularly at the high school, there's been a significant increase in that. That began around November, increased in December, and there has been, you know, some anecdotal discussions about that. But it is important when we look at reviewing and altering and making proposals for models going forward, because the population has shifted in terms of the needs that we were meeting. We did a survey at the start of the school year to see what people's intentions are, and that they have shifted. And there's for a variety of reasons that decision has been made. But I think in looking at the data holistically, it's going to be important to remember that trend when we look at some of the other trends as it relates to mental health, because I do think there is some nexus as an overall connection to all of the data there. So in each of these, I'm trying to reference it back to the fall survey because I'm focusing more on the trends. So that just is in the terms of the selected model. The next, now this is hard, I know, because there's many different categories for. Those top three represent the total, and that number 113 is not the total number. That was just one building. The fall survey number is in the bottom of the pie chart is there. Now, you'll see there has been an increase of this feeling of being overwhelmed. And that is, in my mind, a significant factor, because this is the family survey. And when you translate that onto the both the student survey and even the staff survey, you know, there's a little bit, not a little bit, there is a real sense of COVID fatigue or COVID associated stress. The stamina is a factor. I think a lot of people felt positive that in September that school was starting back up. And I think at this time, as we're into the winter, I think there's been a little bit more feelings of stress, anxiety, overwhelmed, hopelessness, all of that. So that to me is substantial, those increases there, and a little bit shift toward it being tough. So a little bit of increase in the red, blue, and a decrease from, you know, the holistically from the green. But also, if you look at the, this is a total number in the fall, and we broke it out by building. So we have a little bit more precise data. The first survey, it didn't differentiate by the building in massing that. So now we have more precise data. And when we do our next one, we'll continue to monitor that. But that to me is significant. These next ones are for the, these are all the winter surveys, so the one that was recently done. And this is going to be important, again, when you look at the increase over time. So this is at the elementary school. You can see how families are reporting their concern of the social emotional well-being, and also look at this across the buildings. You can see now here's the middle school. So 146 responses from the middle school. It's a pretty good number as far as surveys go. Those are from individual families. And you can see there's a little bit more of a concern for the social emotional well-being. And I think that of all of these is the factor that is most on my mind as we look at the importance of school, the importance of that socialization, the importance of being together. This is the high school. So you can see there's a lot of concern as the older the students are, there's a significant increase in concern. And I think that is, when you look at these stacked on top of each other, you see that there's a shift to the concern as the building, the age of the students increases. Now this is the fall. So you can see you can see a big change in the very concern. And I think that is a significant, I debated about putting all these on one slide. I wanted you to be able to see them. but I could probably share with you. If you look at over here, these 4, you can see this was the fall, the one that's highlighted over here in the left-hand margin where my cursor is. You can see the increase, but like CLS, it's pretty much identical. It's almost identical to the fall. And as the buildings go, you can see there's a shift in that sense of feeling that they're very concerned about the social and emotional well-being, which, you know, I think anecdotally, many parents that we have spoken to have shared that concern. I think we're all feeling that in the community. This is accessing support. This is the winter survey. This is from CLS in terms of accessing support from the district on the survey. The middle school, their assessment of accessing support, and then high school, and then the fall. So what's good about those, and I'll exit out so you can see over time, very consistent. Those look almost like identical slides. So there's a general consistency there. You know, every situation is unique. Every individual is unique. But it was nice to see a little bit of verification and validation that when the supports are needed, that there is responsiveness to that. So that being said, of all of that, and I know the principals will each talk about some of the items that were expressed in writing by the respondents, there is a mental health crisis, not only here in young people all around. And that has to take the foreground as we're like looking at how we get through the spring into the summer and how we plan for next year, because it is normally families and especially high school students, you don't always know what's going on, and the fact that the parents are already expressing that very concerned or that sense of feeling overwhelmed. If you look at that holistically, that is something that cannot be ignored as we make our plans moving forward. So that's the general overview of that. You know, there's a lot of good news in there in terms of connecting people, but I do think that there's some significant stress that that came out in the data. So at this point, I don't know which building would like to start to share a little bit behind the data, some of the anecdotes that we received.
Unmuted. So K5, good evening, everyone. Good to see you all. We kind of looked at it, and it is interesting early on. You heard Albert mention when he was going through the charts, the kind of almost identical from the last time. And I did find that some of the, I kind of looked at some of the positives, looked at some patterns as far as the feedback was concerned. I have a couple of areas where there was a range of responses, and it did seem very similar to the last, the last time we surveyed, but it's good information nonetheless. I think, some positive things. We got a lot of great feedback, like we did last time about opening for 5 days at the elementary school. A really genuine feel that for the younger students, it's just a really good thing. So certainly very happy we were open 5 days a week and able to make it work. Grateful for that. Some other positives. A lot of families did mention, although it being challenging, they kind of, really acknowledge the challenge of this environment just to teach in general, but that their child is meeting the challenge. They appreciate the attention their child is getting when needed. Another had a lot to do with thankful that we provided devices to kids, that we were able to do that in such a quick turnaround, which I agree, I think is a really great thing. We were very lucky to be able to do that and really deploy before school started for the vast majority of families. So that worked out well. So those were a lot of the positives. Some of the ranges of responses we've got were around two kind of specific things: workload and schedule. Workload seemed to be, there were a couple like saying, hey, my kid, or versions of my child has more time for homework. I'd like to see more of that assigned, all the way to the other bookend of that, which is, it's hard, to kind of keep up with it. So that was kind of all over the place. We did get a couple of concerns about specials. I'll talk a little specifically more about that as far as the feedback patterns are concerned later. But trying to keep up with the academics and specials, things like that. And the other range of responses were around our schedule. Really, the concept of the delayed start and really looking forward, everyone saying, hey, everything from basically the delayed schedule is really tough, and I wish the kids were back at school full time, which, you know, certainly would be great. To the other end of it, of, you know, I understand why there's a shift. You know, my child's benefiting from having that extra time for digital and things like that. So those are the two areas we got a bit of a range response, but some of those 3 points of positive earlier were kind of kept coming up. Some of the patterns we noticed in similar to last time had to do with obviously the challenge for the challenge of remote learning for our youngest students was a big concern. And certainly we're always trying to figure out ways to help with that. But yeah, you know, a lot of, in some cases, you know, you weren't sure what grade, but you know, a lot of what you could tell was what K1 and 2 families really talking about the digital interaction is kind of tough. And for some of those families, my assumption is that it wasn't much of, you know, even though they had a choice, you know, for them, for whatever reasons, whether it was medical issues, they had to keep their child home. So they did talk about some of those challenges for the youngest students in the building, which I agree. It's you know, kind of it's hard enough keeping 5 and 6 year olds on task when they're in front of you. So doing that on the screen is kind of tough. And I certainly get that feedback from my younger, the teachers that teach those younger grades as well, and just figuring out how to work through that. The other question was a lot of questions around what does the district think we're going to, when are we going to return to normal? Do we have a plan? You know, kind of statements like, what's our goal? Are we just trying to survive for the year, or do we have a plan for next year? And I think that just comes from some frustration for some families, and certainly we're probably all in the same, have that same question. So obviously, as all you know, we need to wait for some more guidance from the state, as we were last time around before this past September, to figure out what protocols they'd want to keep in place, what might change. So we'll have to wait. But there was definitely a lot of one of the patterns. One of the that was one of the big patterns that popped up, as far as like just kind of the unknown, when are we going to hear, that type of thing, and certainly as soon as we can, we'll figure that out. And then another large pattern had a lot to do, some mentioning of specials, but primarily some mentioning of PE being remote, and the amount of times families are spend trying to catch up, and they'd like to do it in person. I think one quote, you know, said it best, you know, they're doing their best, but it's difficult to engage digitally. You know, and kind of on the tails of that, a lot of families kind of mentioning that physical activity that they used to get in school through PE twice a week, it being digital is kind of a tough thing to keep up with. So for the most part, I think, you know, that was kind of the 3 big patterns we mentioned. Like I said, the challenge for remote learning for our younger students, PE being remote and trying to figure out a way to kind of make, you know, to engage students in that physical activity while not being in the building. And then the plan for next year, which, you know, I think most parents know that we'll have something going when we get more feedback. A few little things about, like, kind of outside of our control. Obviously the delayed start, they want the delayed, a couple parents mentioning they wanted the delayed start time to end that I mentioned earlier. But on the other hand, a lot of people that really understood that we need to do that to accommodate the digital, and that remote learning is not healthy and should stop immediately. Those kind of statements, which, you know, hopefully the closer we can get to in person, we will. And that's about it. That's kind of what we noticed. There were a few things I just wanted to quickly address, and they were just more of, I'm not really sure where they come from, but there was a couple of mentions of students not being able to talk during lunch, which just isn't the case. Kids can talk during lunch, but a lot of it connected to social emotional well-being. And I think I noticed kind of a very similar feedback from the fall survey about concern in that overall. I think parents understand the balance, and I got a lot of really good positive encouragement about how we're kind of focusing on some of those things, but this is tough for kids to kind of nail down, as far as especially kids that have been digital, that had not started the year in person, so who haven't really been in the building since March. So there's always families that are really struggling with that, and we understand. So that's about the patterns we noticed at Chancellor. About 113 responses, similar to the last time, a little lower than last time, but a lot of the patterns and the positive feedback seem to be very similar.
So we want to move on to BMS, or we want to see if there's any questions for Brett? Diane?
Brett, a couple questions.
Mhm.
I'd like to think most of our parents are going to be listening to this, but in case they're not, I'm wondering if some of these kind of questions or topics that came up, if you're able to either respond in your newsletter that you usually do, or a way to kind of answer some of these so that parents know, that so the answers are put someplace.
I could actually, I mean, it's such a great idea. I could kind of just come together with a little a summary and send it out. I have slowed down on my weekly newsletters. It's more of sending stuff out. It might not be weekly like it used to be, because I consciously tried to minimize, obviously, the outreach to families, just because everyone's kind of, getting a lot of emails and stuff. But I think that's a great suggestion. I'd have no problem really putting some of that together. And it would also allow some clarifying points just to, for things like that. I think that's a great idea. If you guys would support that, I'd be happy to put something together.
Yeah.
I think it's a great idea to also validate the participation with surveys.
Yeah.
And to respond to that, because not everybody, I mean, I know that some people come on to watch these, but I think it would be a good way to say, look, you provided that feedback, we're acknowledging that, here is it could create a good positivity there.
No, definitely a good point, because we read every word, and it does help.
Yeah, and it's good if they can get the answers. The other thing is, surveys are kind of new to our district. I'm wondering if, I don't know how the survey's comprised, are we able to take some of this information to get even to our staff so that they can help? Like you kind of talked about workload, like, is that something that you could even look at and say, to the fourth grade team kind of, there was a lot of comments about too much homework, just, so they could see that as well and maybe be useful to them in their work.
Yeah, I can certainly forward that. I can't remember. I think we did that with the last round, but I have it all available. I could even forward, with taking names out or something like that. But I could definitely, even if I summarize it and just got it to the specific groups, and I could do either.
Yeah, I mean, the more useful the information can be to everyone, the better.
Sure.
Yeah, it was just, Diane, for the whole board's knowledge, the survey was designed in such a way that it can be sorted by grade level and by teacher as well. So the families indicated that demographic data, so that can be used that way too.
Right. And just to say again, like, it wouldn't be names, it wouldn't be student names, it would just be like a general, like, by grade or something.
Yeah. No, that's easy enough to do. Absolutely. And I can coordinate, with the other two buildings to make sure stuff like that might go out around the same time if we're going to do it. Absolutely.
Anybody else? Okay. John, do you want to go next?
Yep. Just making sure I was unmuted. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for inviting us to speak about the survey results. Much of the trend data that I pulled out of my survey, Albert has touched upon. I broke my thoughts out in terms of trends and patterns from the student responses, as well as trends and patterns from the family responses. In many cases, they're very similar. In others, they do differ slightly. In looking at student responses, looking at positives, students reported connecting with friends and family, spending time with family, participating in outdoor activities, and pet ownership, interestingly enough, as many of the positive experiences they've had in the last several months. Several noted the use of their new technology and technology skills, Zoom, interactive skills that they've developed over the course of this pandemic as in a way to connect with distant family and friends, and said that was a positive. Several students noted on their responses pretty explicitly and apparently with some surprise, their newfound appreciation for going to school. More than 90% of our students at BMS report having adults at home during remote learning to not only help supervise and facilitate their learning, but to offer academic and emotional support. That number was significantly higher than I expected it to be, and that was certainly a pleasant surprise. Albert touched upon the number of students that are struggling and feeling overwhelmed. Those are certainly the ones that we go to first when we're analyzing the data. While the majority of our students report that they're doing well overall, or at least doing okay, overall, we did have 16 of 170 students report as struggling. Fortunately, of these 16, 8 of them identified themselves by name, and we were pleasantly surprised to find that we have, for those 8 at least that we're able to identify, we have academic support and PPS supports in place for those students. So I was pleased to see that I think we're identifying at least our severely struggling students fairly well. Number of challenges came up. Again, majority of students found the distance learning tools very easily acceptable and accessible, sorry, but yet they're finding the academic workload in many cases to be significant and difficult to use those distance learning tools and to learn in this manner. And of course, our primary concern, students reporting feelings of anxiety. I think we had a 46% response rate on that. Feelings of depression, social isolation, and loneliness. So those are our main concerns. The staff and I are working on a couple. We've got a couple of things in the works to help connect students. To make sure that we help connect every student to an adult in the building, and to provide some more opportunities for social interaction for students. Looking at our trends and patterns in the parent feedback, again, some positives. Parents really showed a genuine appreciation for the support that they're getting from teachers and from the school, for the communication protocols that we have in place. They recognize the hard work that everyone is doing. On the flip side of that, they also have some suggestions for how we could be doing it better. Again, another positive, and this number surprised me as well, though we have experienced some technological glitches in terms of weather and other unrelated reasons. 99% of parents reported that they have access to all the technology they require for their child to be successful. Again, I know we've talked about that in the past, and it was a surprising number to me, and one that I was pleased about. Challenges, again, we go back to parents reporting concern for child's social and emotional well-being, disappointment over their child missing out on the fun parts of school, clubs, lunch and recess, walking and talking with their peers in the hallway, sports, group projects. So we're also, I've shared some of these trends with staff, and we'll be sharing more in depth, but we're going to look for ways to try and address a few of those things. Many of the common themes that came out of our anecdotal, responses from parents fell along a spectrum. So while many parents reported concern for, reported concern for the amount of synchronous learning that their child was getting, and was looking for live streaming of classes, certainly looking for more in-person time in school, we had a number of parents that were concerned about the amount of screen time that their child was putting in at home. So trying to find a balance between those two things. Some parents reported that the hybrid model is working very well, and they like the ease with which students can go in and out. We worked very hard in the middle school to make sure that every student, whether virtual or in person in either of the cohorts, or moving from one to the other for any number of reasons, are receiving the same educational experience. They were appreciative of that. However, the flip side of that is, wanting an increase for more in-person learning. Again, in terms of workload, and this was similar with students. Some people feel that their child is completely overwhelmed, and the workload. And the workload is significant. While on the other hand, we have parents that are reporting that their child is not challenged and is borderline, kind of moving toward boredom. And finally, many report a lack of time management skills, of motivation, of the inability to self-regulate and work independently, all things that are needed to be successful in a remote learning environment. Certainly from a child development level, we in the middle school are concerned about this and looking for ways to kind of build in some supports to help students succeed remotely, because in some cases, those skills are not fully developed. Interestingly, and I just share this trend because we're three weeks out from this survey having ended and having closed. I know Albert shared the cohort numbers, I think, and I would like to see this as a very positive trend. I think parents are starting to allow students back into our buildings. Albert shared the numbers. They weren't broken down specifically, but I wanted to report that we've had 24 students in the last 3 weeks since February 1st return to in-person learning, some form of in-person learning. And many of these, not many of these, but several of these include students who have been fully remote for the full year to this point. So I see that as a very positive trend, and certainly speaks to, this idea of social emotional wellness, and connecting instructional time, between our students and our staff.
Thanks, John. Anybody have any questions for John? Jacqueline?
Sorry, a little delay in my computer, so I unmuted and then remuted, unmuted. Thank you. So John, you mentioned early on and then just mentioned at the very end as well about connecting every student to an adult in the school. Could you elaborate on what the ideas are for that, or what's already happened for that? Can you talk a little more about that, please?
I'd like to present something that is a kind of a fully fleshed out idea to you, and I'm hoping to do that as part of my report on March 9th. We do have a project in place, which, again, once it's fully implemented, and should be in the next couple of weeks. And again, I'm hoping that that information is going to be shared with parents before the March 9th meeting. We'll connect every one of our students in the building in very small groups with individual staff members, and staff members will range from, teachers to non-instructional support staff to administrators. That's something, again, in trying to address the issues of social emotional wellness, that's something we're looking to put in place. So I would prefer if you would allow me a 2-week grace period to present a little bit more about that on March 9th.
Thank you.
Megan?
My question was verbatim what Jacqueline's question was, but I think it's such a good idea that I unmuted myself to second that interest in this, because I think at all 3 schools, this is such a valuable concept, especially for the kids who don't get to come back to school, even when most of them do come back, because we will see some families who choose not to, bring their kids back to maintain that connection through the school year and even into next year potentially. So I'm really excited for your presentation in 2 weeks. Thank you.
Jacqueline?
I just thought of one other thing that actually I think applies to all 3 schools and isn't specific to what John was just talking about, but thinking about connecting with adults in the school. It happened to come up that my daughter doesn't know what her PE teacher looks like. And when we were talking about PE being remote and the challenges of getting physical, there's also a challenge of, literally, she's like, I have no idea which teacher is which. I don't know who they are. So I am guessing she's not the only person in the district. I don't know how common that is in the middle school or elementary school as well, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention since it came up after the survey. That's it.
Anybody else? Diane?
John, so when we're talking about the parents that are, kids that are remote, and you're telling us how 24 have come back, I think that's good news. Do you have a sense, or do parents share with you when kids go remote, like the reason they're remote? And I ask that because I think, there's an assumption that kids are remote because of a fear of the virus or a medical condition or something around that nature. But I'm not sure if that's the only reason kids are staying remote. So I'm just wondering if you have any other information about that.
Again, it's anecdotal. I think it's a number of factors. I think we saw the significant rise in number of remote students just after the holidays. I think that if you look at the numbers, and I could certainly provide you with that data, if you look at the numbers for the students who began fully remote at the beginning of the year, there was a fear there. I think a lot of parents wanted to look at the health and safety protocols that we put in place, make sure that the system works before they sent their child to school. I think in many cases, though, many of those students who were initially fully remote did enter school at some point in the fall. I think following the Thanksgiving break and then following the Christmas break, we had quite a few students that, again, out of fear or because they chose to travel during those holidays or because they chose to invite, family from out of town into their homes. I can't stress enough, and I think this is a good opportunity to do so, that, parents and the community have been, wonderful with communication with the building and working with each of the buildings, working with Albert, working with our school nurses to provide that information. So I think some of it was fear. I'm pleased, again, like I said, at least a handful, I'd say 6 of those 24 students are students who have not been in our buildings at all this year. And I think that that's kind of a positive. I think, parents appreciate the health and safety protocols that we have in place and are starting to feel comfortable and confident in sending their kids to school.
Thank you. And I would also say, similar to what I said to Brett, I think getting the information back to parents and especially students in the high school, middle school, and students are involved so that they know that someone is listening and heard what they said and can give back, if there's some things that could be addressed or, that finding a way to get that back to them is important, beyond this meeting, because it's something we're going to keep doing going forward, I imagine. And, they want to know that, that somebody listened to what they said.
Yeah,
I neglected to restate this, but both the middle school and the high school, the student survey was created by students. So the student council actually developed the tool at each of the buildings, and they were very interested in creating that instrument and then being able to reflect on the data as students, which I think is immensely strong. And it's a really smart approach to let those who are sharing the feedback develop that tool. And I know that that the BMS Student Council did that. I think they worked with, I think Justin worked with the students to create that tool.
Yeah, it was in collaboration with the high school student council.
Anybody else? Thank you, John. Dr. Davenport, you're up.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm going to take a moment and shamelessly steal Coach Thomas's thunder and Mr. Boucher's thunder to report that the varsity boys basketball team had an upset win at Red Hook, 55-52. So it's my pleasure to share that information and steal that good news from my colleagues. So similar to, of course, John and Brett, and as the superintendent mentioned, the student council with Mr. Moore's leadership had input into the survey design and questions. We asked our students to talk about something positive that happened that they recently experienced. And then we also asked them to talk about something that we should know that maybe we don't know as teachers. And in the positive range, one cluster of responses which surfaced was our students found that any connections they were able to make with friends was noted as a positive. And I think the utility of narrative responses and narrative data is that a number of students express this in the same way and in a very powerful way. They said simply something positive. I got to see my friend. A number of students said that. I got to Zoom with my friend, and it was just it just seemed a very powerful illustration of what we know, and that is at this level of adolescence, peer groups and associations outside of the family and outside of the home are crucially important. The students also noted that family activities and bonds were noted as a positive. And we had a number of students say that they had a sibling who returned from college, or as we know, college schedules are a little different this year, or maybe didn't leave for college, and they were happy to be able to spend time with their sibling and get to know their sibling a little better. So that was seen as a positive too. Our high school students noted that they were pleased, or a positive was their academic achievement and teacher feedback on academic work that they were successful on. In terms of things that our high school students shared with us that they thought we should know about their experience, again, similar to Mr. Chemnitz or Mr. King's buildings, there were a range of responses. There were a number of students, certainly not a majority of the responses, or students who are reporting that they're doing well. But a significant number of students as well who report that they're struggling in a remote setting, in particular with the amount of screen time that they need to engage in. They're struggling, they're finding, with organization and with motivation. They also wanted us to know that they're trying. They're trying their best, but this is a struggle for them. In terms of our parents, we had a more open-ended question for our families, our parents, and just asked for any feedback that they wanted to provide to us. Many were very appreciative of the district's efforts and were understanding of the complexity of the task that faces the superintendent and faces the board. But in terms of offering constructive feedback, we had clusters of responses that indicated that the independent work expectations of our students were very challenging. And again, that students are struggling in a remote environment. As I was rereading these responses and thinking of them, the nearest I could think of is that we are asking our students, and they're rising to this task, but it's difficult, but we are asking our students really to be college students at the high school level. They're spending time on their own, reading on their own, engaging in learning activities on their own, and much more time doing that than they are in class. And it reminded me of the old truism way back when I left for college, that you were to spend 3 times as much reading as you were in class in college. So our students they're rising to the challenge, but it's difficult for them. Another common request, and again similar to Mr. Chemnitz's building, was a request for more contact with teachers, and that was a very common theme. But that kind of contact was split, in my view, into 2 categories. There was a request for more live stream contact, more digital contact. Also, and I don't know, in opposition is not the right word, but parents are saying we want more live, we want more in-person contact with teachers, not necessarily more live streaming, but more in-person contact. So I think the main takeaway for me and for our faculty is that again, the model of instruction, although it meets many tasks that we have to, many challenges that we have to address, continues to be a challenge for our students. And our parents are looking for more contact and more academic contact with teachers. And lastly, more social contact, of course, which is, I think, a theme throughout all three buildings.
Any questions for Dr. Davenport? I think it's very interesting on the independent work study. I mean, I find that with Shay quite a bit. Hopefully it's something that we can integrate into the curriculum to kind of keep that going, because I think any kind of head start you can get to heading to college would be a real plus. Thank you for the three of you for attending tonight. One of the things I would ask is if there's things that we can do, change, implement with the current environment based on the survey responses. I think the community would appreciate that. I think there's a lot of regulations around the CDC and the state that tie our hands in a lot of that.
Yeah.
But if there's things that we can do to kind of either change the way we're delivering or increase the amount of delivery and socialization, I think that would go a long way with our community, before the end of the year. Great.
Wait,
Next is budget development presentation number 2.
Diane has.
Oh, sorry.
I guess I just want to ask a little bit more specifically, I guess maybe to you, Albert, but maybe any of you want to answer. I mean, that was overwhelming from all the surveys, basically, the same theme of, can we be in person a little bit more? And so I guess want to ask specifically, is there any hope this year that we could be in person more, or any of the buildings?
I mean, the one of the things that we have to reflect on, and we'd have to partner with all, similar to what we did in the summertime when we really involved broad stakeholders to the table to develop all of that. One of the challenges is that when we have a flexible model, flexibility it sounds like it's a nice thing to have, but it's actually terrible flexibility, because to have to enable students to be able, or families to be able to kind of flow in and out, you have to be able to have that capacity set for that. So the one thing that I had, is still as an idea, is that to get more concrete, firm commitment, we cannot exclude anyone for the remainder of the year. But if we were to say the fourth quarter, let's use as an example, it comes 2 weeks after the spring break week, which, if that is going to be a time of travel, it would require a quarantine period or whatnot. So if that time, we would need to get accurate data on the numbers that we're dealing with so that we could plan accordingly. Because if we were to increase that, we still have to maintain maximum density until the local health department gives us some relief from the distancing, because that capacity is one factor. So that's really the number one as it relates to more in-person is the density issue and the distancing. We could look at some additional contact through streaming. There's all those things are in discussion, all of that. But as far as the physicality piece, we're going to need a little bit of flexibility given to districts and guidance that it's safe to do so. And the local health department has been asked that question, pointed directly around that, and they just are keeping under review on that. So we have another meeting tomorrow, and that is on our list. The superintendents as a group, as a block, I think all communities are facing that similar question. Some districts are still 2 days a week for K-12. And, we opened at CLS, we were like, we have to figure out a way for that regularity for the youngest students. But I think from just a mental health perspective, there's got to be something done 6-12. So, I'm committed to making adjustments. I don't think what we started with is going to be what we end with. I think we can have, a lot more. We've learned a little bit more about the virus, so the health department has been very cooperative with that. Their biggest game changer in their mind is once we can start to open up the windows on a regular basis, that's going to make a big difference as well in terms of their recommendations. So that's, top priority. I think the surveys aside, I think we all collectively, teachers too, I mean, people want the kids back. What we're doing now is not an easy model for anyone. But I do want to just say to that point, and I am completely on board with that point, is that part of the design of what we're doing, it does have, we're unique in that we have, although very small, we do have regular direct interaction with our remote students. So our remote students are getting teaching from the teachers particular to them as a class section, similar to like the yellow cohort or the purple cohort. And as I've shared before, it's like going to a wedding and only getting appetizers, so everyone's hungry, but everyone gets something. So we are not creating a class system where the in-person students are getting direct instructions and then the remote students watch that instruction, because some of the streaming models are that. The remote model is you watch the in-person classes, which is not high quality delivery. So I think there are pluses and minuses to all of those approaches. So I want to be thoughtful about that. But I think with all of our heads and partnering with our teachers, we can brainstorm some real improvements to what we're currently doing.
Thank you. So as far as action, I guess it seems, so one of the biggest barriers to being in person more is the 6-foot rule, right? And having capacity.
Yeah.
But so we have lawmakers saying kids should be back in school and we should make that happen. And we have the CDC, people going back and forth, whether it could be 3 feet now or 6 feet now. So I'm just wondering if there's something we can do as a board or something parents can do. Is there, getting that clear? That's a big deal. 3 feet and 6 feet is a big deal.
It absolutely is a big deal.
I'm just wondering if there's something we could do or should be trying to do to clarify that, medically, is that going to be okay? And, when can we do that? Because that's kind of the whole ball game, right?
But it absolutely is, because, a district doesn't have the capacity to hire a whole army of additional sections of teachers. We don't have that. That's not a possibility. One thing that I think could be very effective, and I granted, I'm just saying this off the cuff, so I hope Mark is okay with it. But I think if the Dutchess County School Boards Association put a little pressure on the local health department, because what this is this is established at the county level. Now, our county operates on a regional basis. So if you saw with the sports reopening, it was like Dutchess, Ulster, Orange. It's kind of like they operate regionally, like the 7 counties. But if we were able to, get a little bit more advocacy there, because I can tell you the school leaders, we're all pushing for clarity. We're not lobbying for any particular number, because one of the things people will say is, how do we know 5 feet is more challenging than 6 feet? And some people are like 5.5 feet. It's all over the place. And there isn't clarity there. But that is a hampering tool when we're operating, and we're not going to budge on that until somebody tells us to budge on it. There's some who interpret it that says 6 feet or a barrier, but there's other language that says regardless of a barrier. So, we want clarity. So any advocacy the board could do, or even the county association, I think, with the health department, is saying we need your public health expert. I'm not a public health expert. I'm an educator, and I'm pushing, but we're going to need that additional guidance to know when it is safe to do it.
Yeah, I agree. And, we did talk a little bit to our legislators about, just making decisions quicker, but maybe we could send a communication to our legislators just on that point. Could they just clarify that point for us? Because they can't be publicly saying, yes, school should be back and kids should all be back. And then, behind the scenes, tie our hands and not let us do anything about it.
I will say, I think one point of frustration is that in other parts of the state, you can see reports where people are having more students in. And the response that we've gotten to that is the statement has always been, well, if the parents are okay, like the reopening plan, if the parents are okay with it, the teachers are okay with it, that can be a reopening plan. It's a very weak model. So every health department is enforcing things differently. So you will see I don't mean like district to district, but region to region, you will see differences in how they're interpreting the guidance. And they're like system wide, like within that region. So I think that's a point of frustration, because, social media connects people. People see reports of other schools where there's a classroom full of 25 kids. They're like, how can they do it? And we can't. And it is because, we are guided by the reopening guidance, which has to be supported by our local health department, who has established the 6 feet. So that's really what it is. It's not even at the state level. They keep pushing it off to everybody else.
Mark?
Yeah, so I'd be happy to bring that forward to the county association, and we can also ask the Lower Hudson Coalition to see if they can give us a little support there as well.
I think that would be very effective. I know the Lower Hudson Superintendent's Group has been very frustrated also with the lack of certainty. Also around planning for next school year, we need to know what the rules are. We need to know the rules of engagement in terms of what we're expected to offer, because we made some pretty significant changes at CLS to pull this off. And those are programs that are designed on purpose for the kids. Like STEM is designed to be there for the kids. And if that right now as a classroom teacher, because of social distancing, those decisions were made because of the distance. So that's big when you really add up the dollars of what they're hampering it. And we need to know now, because we're planning for a year that looks, we don't know. We need more guidance on that.
Yeah, I mean, next year, while it may seem far away, I think families make decisions on, what they're going to do with their kids, what they're doing with their jobs, if they have to stay home. I mean, getting that information out as soon as possible is important. It's planning for the board. We're doing the budget now. Like if our staffing, what we have to, planning for everybody, it's important. So while we don't know everything that's going to happen, we do know a lot more than we knew last year. So yeah, that I think figuring that out sooner than later is going to be really important.
Yeah, I do expect us to have more information as the spring occurs. I think there's been a lot of signals to that, with the return of the larger venues, like sporting. I mean, there's been some like little indicators for that, and I'm sure everyone saw the news reports today about the maintenance of standardized assessments, without accountability measures. That all just happened today. We got no advance notice of that. We just get that dropped like out of the blue. Oh, these are happening. Which has so many layers of complications of issues of equity, of district to district, of who is accessing that, and not the remote students won't take those. And the state will be giving some information out about the Regents exams. All of that is coming out, but I do expect, I am optimistic that we're going to have further information so that we can have accurate planning, in the next several weeks. I'm hoping that in the spring, because every single superintendent, every single school board in the entire state is really pushing for that information. So I believe that will come to fruition. I know all of the advocacy groups are in the same place.
Fred, did you have your hand up? Okay. Guess we'll move on to budget.
Okay, principals, thank you so much for being here. You did a great job. I appreciate that. All right, I will start us off. I'm going to share the screen. So tonight's budget presentation is going to be focusing on revenues, facilities, operations, maintenance, technology, and general support. The most significant information I can provide is even this, in terms of, you will see when Tom presents on the state aid, there's still some uncertainty there because, as you know, from the advocacy briefs that the New York State School Board Association has put out, the challenges of the governor's executive proposed budget using the federal aids as a stopgap, is a matter of concern. So we will be touching upon that briefly. But in each of these areas, we have had meetings with the budget developers to probe them and to talk about the longer range planning associated with that. So we're going to go through these, the slides, and we're prepared to respond to any questions. And just as a reminder, we did our first presentation last week. So anybody who's viewing this can look. Last week's meeting recording has an overview of the process. We'll also have the slide decks available for anyone to review them. And just as a reminder to the board, we are focusing on these individual sections to kind of a deeper dive. So to whatever extent we can probe those sections, when we do present the full package at the next meeting, we will have covered a lot of those pieces in anticipation of that. And also, before I continue here, next week's meeting will focus on the instructional programs. So it'll have the curriculum and then the instructional support chunk separated out as a presentation, and then we will also share the full picture as well. I'm just, as a reminder, and this is a new polar bear. I'm obsessed with them. that from last time. You'll see how there's all new artwork in this presentation. So this is what our guiding principles, I covered those last time. And as I had shared, that the budget is not just only about the numbers, it's about supporting the program. It's about having vision, having plans for development of an academic program and experience for the kids. And these are the principles that we're using. So in my conversations with Tom, each of the budget developers, we're keeping these at the center of the table. Here's where we are today. You can see the overall schedule of what presentations. I covered that briefly. And first up, revenues. So we're going to talk through the sections of revenues. And this is the same. This is the current year allocation. And we're going to begin first with the tax levy. So Tom and I reviewed that earlier, and Tom's going to be presenting that now.
Well, actually, it's going to be Christine. So Christine.
Unmute myself.
There you go.
All right, so to start off the revenue piece, we're going to start off with the tax levy piece because that ties into the revenues. So to start off with that, it's a little formula that we have to follow. And these are the factors that are in that piece. So we have our prior year tax levy. We start with that. Then we're multiplying that by our tax-based growth factor. And then we are adding back in any of our pilot payment that we received during this current school year. And then we're subtracting out our net capital payments. So it's our debt service payments that we pay minus our building aid that we're receiving. So then that brings us to our adjusted prior tax year levy. So then we continue on and we multiply that number by our allowable tax levy growth factor. And then we're adding back in our known pilot payment for the 2022 school year. And if we had any carryovers, we would factor that in, but we don't. And now that brings us to adding in our budgeted amount for our capital payment. So that again is it's the net capital payment with, so it's our debt payment minus our projected building aid that we're going to be receiving. And that gets us to our maximum allowable tax levy at the $31,636,000. The screen's cutting it off for me. So as we tie that in, it's about a $901,050 increase, which represents a 2.93% increase over the current year tax levy. So you'll see here, this is our revenues put together as a group, and we start off with our tax levy up on the top, and you'll see that we have our projected budget, which is the $31,636,909, and our budget to budget increase is the $901,050 or $901,50, which is the 2.93% increase. So that calculation ties directly into our revenue portion of our budget. We also have in there our payments in lieu of taxes, and then any interest and penalties we will receive on taxes. That brings us down to our charges for services. In that category, we have a reduction in there, but we also have an increase. Our non-tuition students, currently at this point, we have one student, and that is it, and that's all we're projecting for. But on the upswing, we do have other charges for schools, and that is on the increase based on the amount of enrollment that is in this private school. So that's an increase right there. But the overall picture for that component is a decrease. Then we go to our uses of money and property. This is interest and earnings. That's a big piece right there. And as we all know, the economy has taken a hit here. And so our interest that we're receiving on any of our income and monies that are in the bank is very low. So our rates are not projected to increase. And as you see in the treasurer's reports, the percents that we are receiving on our monies are not high at all. Hopefully, as the economy gets better and we get out of this COVID a little bit more and the economy grows, we'll maybe see a little bit of growth in the interest, but at this point we're not. And then right now our rental of real property, that's when other groups use the district, we can charge for the use of the facilities like the gyms or those factors. And right now we're not doing that. Hopefully we will be able to do that next year, but we do see a reduction there as well. That brings us down to our sale of property and compensation for loss. We have our sale of scrap and excess materials. So we are anticipating that we will be selling a dump truck and or other miscellaneous materials that we do excess. And we have been working with an auction company to help sell those items, and it's producing a revenue for us. And we have done it this year with the renovations of the kitchens and some of the materials in the kitchens. So that's provided a revenue source for us, which is really good. Insurance recoveries, that's a reduction. Sometimes we will receive some insurance, maybe some dividends or anything like that, but that's projected to be decreased as well. Moving down to miscellaneous, we've increased our BOCES refund. That's any monies that we get back in our unused BOCES expenses from the prior year. So this would be for any unused funds from this current year that we're in right now. We will get the refund back next year. Any refund of prior year expense, that's down. We don't really receive that much money in any refunds. Gifts and donations, that's a big decrease. This current year we had the gifts and the donation from the RSF for the one-to-one computing. We do not have anything projected in the budget for this current school year, as that project will not be taking place and that project's been satisfied. So any other miscellaneous revenue is any other items we may receive that we didn't budget for, and we really don't receive a lot on that either. So we can go to the next slide. So this is state aid. I'm going to skip over that for now and continue with the revenues, because Tom's going to go into greater detail on the state aid piece, because there are some new factors and new allocations that we need to address this year. But one thing that we do receive, you can go back, oops. Under our federal aid, we do receive that right now, and that's for services that we do bill out for. It's at $35,000. We're not projecting that to increase from this budget. That is going to be a standstill. And then our interfund transfers, we do receive, this is for money that we receive for our summer school kids that we generally, the district is, or the general fund really is part, 20% part of those summer services. So that's what that is. That's coming in from the special aid fund. And then our debt service fund also provides the general fund with money to provide off the debt. And then we have our appropriated fund balance piece that we put towards the levy to as a balancing act for the budget and the expenditures. And that's an increase this year's, or actually, sorry, it's a decrease from the monies that were put forward this current year. So with that said, I'm going to turn this over to Tom to discuss the state aid factors.
Okay, Albert, if you can go on to the next slide there. This is a better breakdown, and I can describe each one of them. So our first one up at the top is foundation aid. That remains the same, no increase or decrease. Our building aid did take a substantial decrease this past year. And if you remember from last week, when we did the debt service, we had a large part of an issue drop off. And accordingly, the building aid associated with that also drops off. And you would have seen in the previous, maybe you've seen in either through NISCUS or the state aid websites and that of our building aid being 51,000. That did not take in consideration the new money that's going on. The state did not calculate any of the districts getting new monies, telling them what their building aid was. But Bernie Donegan's office that we work with estimated what that state aid would be based on that. So not as big as a hit as what you may have seen, but it's still a pretty big hit as far as that's concerned. But we dropped off a lot of debt service. We've already built up over the past 3 years to build up this new influx for the debt service. So we're in good shape when it comes to our debt service along that line, but it is a very big number. But when you see the whole picture next in 2 weeks, it will become more clear. Transportation aid is down, and that's a factor of our combined wealth ratio. That is one thing that has hit our books this year in state aid, as our combined wealth ratio has gone up. It affects different aids differently. It does not affect your foundation aid, it doesn't affect your building aid, but it does affect two big areas for us, and one of them being transportation aid. We've gone down to the minimum of 7%. We had gone up to about 17%, but that slight little, not a slight change, but the change to our combined wealth ratio has brought us back down to the minimum of 7%. So that is a big decrease, and that is hurtful. Our high tax aid has been the same for about 2 decades. It's 100,000, not changing. The pandemic aid adjustment, I'm showing this coming out of the state aid, okay? In the federal aid, you'll see it going in. The feds will want us to segregate this from New York State. New York State can't claim this is their aid. This aid came from the feds. It's got to be separated, and we'll see that on the next slide. High cost aid and private excess cost aid, slight changes, and there's slight changes every year. But every year we pick up more and more of that cost, just to let you know. It's just a factor of it. BOCES aid, you just see is slightly down. We did spend more money with BOCES last year, but our combined wealth ratio reduced our aid a little bit. Not tremendously, not nowhere like transportation aid. Textbook aid, software aid, and library materials aid went up. And that is a reflection of actually having more students than the previous year. This combined public with private and parochial. They're all combined together. So Albert, if we see the bottom line, we see a negative, 1.4 million, but let's go to the next slide. And we had the pandemic adjustment, okay? The feds gave us basically $229,000 for this year, right? The feds did, not the state. So the state took the money away from us, but the feds gave it back to us. It was just switching it from one hand to the other. And next year, preliminarily, it's $684,000. Okay, that's preliminary. That was based on the governor's January budget. This does not reflect, and nor do we know what will reflect how much money the state may get in that $1.9 trillion. I know a bunch of billions of dollars are going to the state. How that's allocated out to the municipalities is yet, we haven't seen that. So we know that there'll be an adjustment coming up. We just don't know how much, when it's going to be known to us. Typically this number gets firmed up on April 1st, because within the past few years, they've been pretty good about having an on-time budget. So we know our aid factors before the board adopts their budget. So those things are known in advance. I'm hoping we'll get to that same thing this year, having a budget completed about April 1st. But this year, as you know, is very different from other years. So we'll just have to keep our fingers crossed and hope that, we'll see a budget soon. So yeah, overall, it is a decrease in state and federal aid. let's wait till you see the whole picture before you go, oh my God, okay? Just wait till you see the whole picture, and that's gonna be in 2 weeks. What my major concern here is that $684,000, and who knows what that number could become. There could be a huge influx coming in from the state based on this. The question I'm concerned about is 22, 23. Is the state and federal going to be somewhat similar, or are we going to have a big hole a year from now, 2 years from now? So that is a big concern of myself. But in this budget cycle, please wait till you see the whole thing in 2 weeks before you really go, oh my God, it is a big decrease here. It is. But wait till you see the whole picture, and it's not as bad as the numbers you think it is. Because it was a scary number when I looked at it at first. But so let's go to the next slide. So before we go
Tom,
on,
I think we should just, if there's any discussion on the revenue side,
correct.
I could go back to some other slides. You have this in the backup material, but anything I can go back to if you'd like, if there's any questions or clarifications on that.
Jacqueline?
Yeah, I was just trying to look up our budget 101 document with the glossary on my phone, because I was trying to remember and I couldn't remember what is the high public cost excess and private excess. What does that mean?
Yeah, there's public and there's private. Public is for special ed students who go to a public setting, and that typically would be a BOCES or to another public school district.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be for, like I say, that high cost public excess cost aid. Typically, they're special education students attending a BOCES or another public school.
So I'm sorry. So it's support from the state for us to provide for students who go to BOCES, special education students who go to BOCES, or in the case of the private excess aid, who go to private institutions.
Yes, correct. And in private, they would go to those private schools like Astor or Devereux, something along that line.
Thank you.
I don't see anybody else, but then again, I only see 6 people. So
I think we're good.
think we're good? All right. So operation and maintenance. So we sat down with Sheldon, had a great conversation with Sheldon, and would really like to really congratulate his staff and crew. They've been doing a great job this year, keeping these buildings clean. We've had a lot of snow this year, as you've seen out there, and hopefully it's stopping for a while. But let's go to the next slide and we'll talk some things specifically. First line you see up there, custodians, and you see a negative, a decrease. We had 2 retirements this year. So 2 cleaners retired. Of course, they've already been replaced, but we are now seeing a savings based on the change of personnel there. Under equipment, he has $25,000 in the budget for next year, and that is to replace the courier van. So that money is there. I just want to hit the highlights here. The next section, about a little more than halfway down, you start with fuel, oil, and electricity. That is a byproduct of this particular project that we are finishing up on with the new LED lighting, the new windows that have been placed around it throughout this building, the new window walls over at Chancellor. We're going to see some savings. So we're starting to back off that number. We don't really have a true number this year because one of the things that Sheldon has had to do is increase airflow into the building. So we know we're using more fuel than typically. Windows are open. There's more airflow as per the health department. The other negative down there for BOCES services.
Tom, let me just jump in there.
Yep.
So what we decided to do as part of our reopening plan was that instead we actually increased the amount of runtime on all of the mechanical. So that was part of what we did. So that is where that comes from. We did that just to make sure there was a more continual air exchange.
Yeah, but Sheldon couldn't get an idea of really what it's like with everything new in here. With the BOCE services, this is the dark fiber project. The dark fiber project, we're seeing some of that. We're paying about $11,000 less in the internet. So that's great to know that it's looking at us as one campus instead of two separate campuses, which Steve always talked about. And then we have an increase in supplies just because in this new world of ours, we're noticing that we're going through supplies a little bit more than in previous years. So next slide. This is the other half of Sheldon's shop. So the first half of the shop was the operation of plant, and that is the cleaning of the plant. That's where all your cleaners, custodial work, and all those supplies. The maintenance of the plant are our groundskeeper, maintenance workers. And as we see, very little change here. In the equipment line, he's looking to replace the dump truck and or possibly a pickup, depending on how much a dump truck is going to cost us and possibly what we may get back in some the sale of the previous dump truck. We'll see what that works out to be. So the other big thing here is repair and maintenance, and basically you see a big negative there. But that decrease was the sustainability project that was in there. We don't have anything around that at this time, so those monies were taken out of this budget. So that's why you're seeing a big decrease in the repair and maintenance.
I just want one clarifying point. We are doing work with sustainability. We did join, it wasn't that we don't have, we do, it doesn't fit in this section of the budget. It's actually going to go into the BOCE section. We created their Center for Sustainability. So it's going to be at a different amount, like a lesser amount. But there is still the district's commitment to the sustainability work, and we joined the BOCE Center for Sustainability. That's why it's coming out of this section, because it'll go into the BOCE's section.
Sorry, I forgot about that, Albert. Thank you for bringing that up. So any questions about operation and maintenance?
Mark?
Yeah, so I'm just wondering, it seems like the price of gasoline is going up right now. Have you given any thought to maybe leaving some money in the budget for fuel oil that may increase in price as well?
Yeah, he's got a big buffer. He's got a buffer in for that. He does. We should be good, Mark. But that's a good point. Good point, though. That was one of my first questions to him, actually. And he's fully aware of that. So unless we get a very, very, very cold winter with very, very high prices, we should be good. Any other questions?
I don't see any.
Okay. So technology.
Tom, let me just kick this off.
Yep.
So one of the biggest shifts that we're working with in technology specifically is having a plan now for replacement. So having a one-to-one is great. It's to get it started is one thing, the maintain it is another. So in our work with Steve, what we requested was a very specific, and I'm leaving this slide up here because I think this artwork is beautiful also, but we're working with Steve, and we're going to present to you tonight what the replacement plan will look like for those devices, so that we're in a continual rotation of bringing in new devices every year and filling in the gaps. The benefit of doing this is that it lets people know where on the schedule they are, both for our teachers, for example. They'll know when they're going to be getting new devices, which grade level, where they replenish, and then what we do with the graduating classes device to fill in any of those damaged or prematurely aging devices. So we had a session with Steve, and then a follow-up he shared with us this plan. So we talked through all of that, and I think that's a really responsible, good thing to do, so we clearly know what we're looking at going forward. So you can see here, this is for next year. These are some of the general flow. there are some missing numbers. I took out some things that were just curriculum oriented. So you'll see next year that the third grade will get new computers. Those are the students who are currently in iPads going from second into third. So then they'll get new devices going into third grade. The seniors' laptops will be to fill in any of those damaged devices that they have. And also CLS teachers have the oldest laptops, so they will receive new laptops next year. And then every year, this is the following year, again, it's always going to be that third grade because it's going to be the kids who take their iPads, that the second graders will have the oldest iPads. Eighth graders will receive their new, and then the seniors will be redeployed throughout the BMS laptop. So each year you'll see the cycle continues through that. When you calculate it out, it is technically a span of time of just about 5 years that the grade level will have a device before that device is replaced with a new one annually. So there's going to be an annual replacement. You'll see in this year projected out there, the iPads in the kindergarten level, that is to replace, they're all at different ages. And so one of the things we talked about is even like the charging port, for the use of the carts, that has to be taken into consideration. So to get us all, to have the inventory match up. So we have, then it starts to become a pattern and a cycle, which is an important thing for us to do. The next step to a roadmap like this is to have the curriculum impact of the instructional technology and what the plan is around those aspects as well. So this is a start, and I'm glad to see that we're going to know in advance of what grade level we're talking about. Then we can link it up to actual numbers because we have the enrollment, and it allows for us to have a more accurate and more of a strategic plan for how do we continue with the devices. So I share that as by means of just the overall plan and approach to it, so that when you see the budget, that you understand where that is coming from, and it's not just thinking 1 year in advance, but it's thinking further out. And that'll be continued to be developed over time.
Right. So to now look at his section here, we see his equipment line has come down by a good $86,000, and that was because of that one-to-one creating that. But what we've basically done is we've converted the lease money to purchasing equipment. So overall, no net increase, even though that looks pretty high up there at the 270,000. A lot of those monies got siphoned off of BOCES services so that we can to fund it through equipment as opposed to going through BOCES. So really, that's really the only thing of really significance here that's going on, is just that we are coming up with the plan in advance, a multiple year, and we've moved it from lease to outright purchasing.
Can I ask where the Project Lead the Way, Gateway, and the CLS numbers would fall? Would they be part of this replenishment cycle, or is that done separately? Currently that is in the building budget currently, because that is supervised at the principal. So the principals have that development. That is one of those elements that has to get tied into the 4-year technology plan. So in our system, because of our school size, and that has to all be put in there as well into those lab spaces. He did have additional information about replacing certain lab, but it has to be much more detailed into that plan as those facilities age. But currently the funding for those are in the building budget. That's currently how it is. We could look to transition it to an overall K-12 technology. That's kind of how it's done traditionally. My recommendation may be that we keep it in the buildings, because I want us to move away from thinking as technology being separate from instruction, because it is such a part of all of it. But maybe we could present the data more as a global district-wide technology overall picture, so we can see the trends over time, and then just draw out of those budget avenues so we can still see that as one whole. Because I do agree with you, it's kind of, it looks disjointed to only see this little slice of it, and it's not really the full impact of it. So I think that's good feedback for how we can improve that presentation part.
Excuse me. Other questions?
Jacqueline?
Oh,
Yes, on the the technology plan and how computers are moving up through the grades and then being redeployed from seniors, are students keeping their devices? I mean, will, a ninth grader moving into 10th grade get the same device back after some maintenance?
It's interesting that you asked that. We talked about that. The current plan is no, that those devices would get collected each year and then be what's flattened like everything would be, and so that it would not be they would be collected annually. So there are pros and cons to doing it both ways. In my former district, the students got the device and they had it until they graduated or until they were replaced, and then would draw them back, because it is quite a process to recollect a lot of devices. It's a huge undertaking. The benefit of that is the schools who do recollect them is it does extend the lifespan of the devices, because it's not in a lot of that unstructured time over the summer. I think COVID has kind of turned all that on its head in terms of understanding that. I think I've been really impressed with how well the students have been taking care of their devices. We now have the elementary school kids taking them back and forth. But the current plan is that they're collected and kind of restored to a level. They're analyzed. And, the plan is to ask for feedback if there's an issue with the device so that we can replace it with one of the seniors. But that is currently the plan.
And follow up, will we be doing in-house, wiping, clean, and maintaining over the summer? Is that going to be in-house, or are we hiring?
It's done in-house.
And did we need to increase anywhere in the budget to provide for that?
No, we have not. A couple years ago, we got some good software that you enabled Steve to get, which enables to do multiple updates at the same time. So instead of hitting each one individually, they're able to do it en masse. So none of this handling each machine individually. Everything can be done by hooking it up to the cart, and they can update everything at one time.
The MacBooks allow for that. If you were, when we got the big drop of all of the devices in the BMS RHS library, Brendan was in there and and the entire place was just filled with all of the devices. And I don't know the actual technical term for that, but it is something that's done on mass. They feel very confident that it is achievable.
They'll be busy, but doable. Any other questions?
I don't see any, Tom.
Okay.
So the athletics is relatively straightforward year to year.
Yeah, this is pretty straightforward. There's not too much changes here. A slight increase for coaches. Of course, we have our athletic trainer who's now in the budget and is there, which is a good thing. The equipment, just to let you know, he's looking to get a light pole to be able to hang the camera from for outdoors, so it does better at tracking the ball, so that people who are able to watch the games online will have a better experience. It's just to get it up higher so it has a better angle at the field. Other than that, really not too much, to say about the athletics as far as the budget is concerned. So does anybody have any specific questions?
I will just add that, and again, this is a work in progress in terms of changing our budgeting scheme. The other thing that we talked to the athletic director about was a schedule even for replacement. We do recondition uniforms, but having that all scheduled out in a longer term plan so that it is not, you'll see these individual spikes of when new uniforms are ordered for one. So we'll also have a similar plan and approach in this area.
Is that what's in other expenses? I mean, that number jumps around quite a bit.
You mean down at the very bottom, other expenses,
right,
uniforms?
Right in the middle.
Other expenses there. Okay, well, other expenses, that's where we used to pay the athletic trainer out of. So as you can see in the 1920, it was zero under non-instructional salary, but 89,000 for other expenses, because that's where our trainer came out of. He was not an employee of ours. When he became an employee of ours, then here we see the salary at the top, but we're also able to reduce the overall budget by 40,000 at that time.
So then why is that number going up by 5.3% next year?
Actually, that was a number. Actually, Steve needs to get back and give me a better number. He fine-tuned everything except for that current one, and he couldn't get me anything in time. And that was a number I just happened to have in there. I'm sure when we see the whole thing next time, that will be a different number and probably lower. It should be lower.
Okay.
That's cool. Like that piece of artwork. So this next section is going back to the original, starting from the top of the budget and kind of going through. I'll try to do this pretty quickly. There's not a whole lot of changes, but need you to see some of these things and ask us if you need us to change anything. So at the top, Board of Education. Haven't put any changes in there. And really the only thing that I think that's really, and that's that travel and conference, the second line. And I'm anticipating that hopefully things go back to normal and you do go to the conferences and do those things that you've done in past years. And unless somebody is looking to do additional travel and conference, or just let Albert or Whitney or myself know about that. But those have been pretty, kind of got them up a little bit last year. Some extra dues that we got with the Mid-Hudson or the Lower Hudson Coalition. So those type of things there. District clerk, really nothing consequential at all. So if we go to the next page, district meeting, that is for the budget vote. That's what district meeting is. That's the official budget or the official title of it, of the board. It's called, the board vote is called a district meeting. So that's everything associated with that. We have the superintendent's code. So really nothing too much there. I did increase his travel and conference, thinking that he may want to travel to conferences where in the past, the previous superintendent did not like to do that. I just want to put that in Albert's wheelhouse, that if he wants to do to a conference, there's money there for it. If he doesn't, we'll take it out. In this slide, this is for the business office. Really, I think there's really two things I want to point out, and that's in the clerical with the retirement of one of our senior account clerks. We're seeing that savings there. So that's some nice things. The other thing I did a few lines down on appraisal fee, I increased that to $10,000. We need to do an appraisal of our building once we've got this whole project done. We'll have our insurance company and maybe BOCES. We're working with them to get us a real good price. And especially if we can do it through the BOCES, we can get some aid back on that. So that number I expect will be coming down. In auditing, our claims auditor has been more thorough, so it is taking her more time. So I do have to account for that. And we do know what our external auditor fee is for next year, because I think we're in year 3 of our 5-year contract with EFPR. On the next slide, we'll be getting to some other little minor things: treasurer, tax collection, purchasing. Really nothing too exciting here. So I would just move to the next slide. I mean, I don't want to waste too much time here. Legal, keeping it at 50,000. It had been 40,000 in previous years, but I think 50 is probably our new normal, just because it's in the years past, it really just been, our attorney on retainer. It's now gotten a lot more complicated out there, but other than that, pretty much everything else is just normal.
Where does the arbitration number come out of?
That would come out of there. That would definitely come out of the legal expense, and so that's where arbitration would end up, with coming out of legal. Central printing, there is a little bit of a change here, and I think this is a really good thing, and that's under our copiers. So Steve came to me with a proposal, and I really like it, even though it's a slight uptake. And this is what's been occurring. Our printers that are in the classroom are starting to go. And that's not, in education, having a printer in your classroom now is a luxury. Typically, things are printed to copiers and they go picked off the copiers and things of that nature. The upkeep and keeping track of the copiers, keeping them maintained, the toner and everything, just about every school district I know is going to copiers. So our current provider, National, provided Steve with a very nice proposal, which would replace all 11 of our current copiers 1 year before they're ready to come up, plus an additional 7 copiers to be used throughout the district, 2 for each building and 1 for the library in this building, the middle school, high school. So 1, 2 will get placed in each of the buildings for teachers to print to from their classroom, for kids to be able to print from the classrooms. They still will have their printers in there, but we're slowly switching ourselves over to the copiers. And you'll see a bit of an increase there, and that really is for overages, okay? The whole package is coming in less than what it was the year before. Actually, it comes almost right to the penny, so it's almost no additional cost. But where we've been hit pretty hard over the past year is in our use of the copiers and those overage charges. But we added software to it. Steve added software called Paper Cut, which will be able to track who's doing what and when, who's making the copies, what type of copies. So we'll be able to actually limit how much anybody uses the copier. And if you need to go to Steve to increase those limits if it's sound. So I think in the overall, this is going to be really good for the school district. But it's new territory out there. Central data processing is actually also Steve's area. This is where we fix everything. This is Brendan and Michelle. This is their section. So really not too much changes there at all as far as that's concerned. So go on to the next slide. Special items. So insurance, our insurance broker told us everything should remain pretty neutral. We should not be seeing a spike in our rates whatsoever. They're, the insurance, Utica National is our insurance company. School districts this year have been doing really well overall. That's where a refund check may come from. That's what that refund on the revenue side is. If school districts do really good, we get a refund check back from Utica National, anywhere from $5,000 to $10,000. So that doesn't change. We still have our association dues, no change there. And there is a decrease in the admin charges. Now remember, this is a part of the budget you actually vote on. That's a part of that vote in later on in the year. Not only are you voting for the BOCES trustees, you're also voting on the administration portion of their budget. And as you see, it's a little bit less this year. It went down by $7,000 to $150,000. But I also want to bring this up. This number could change over the next couple months. And I believe you are all aware of the issues going on with the BOCES project. This was anticipation that they'd be leaving the beta site, but they may have to extend the beta site for another 6 months. So as much as we may have saved $7,000, it may go back. Believe me, it's not going to be a huge thing. It's not going to be huge. But I could see that being wiped out if, in fact, if they have to continue the rent past what they expected. So I just want to put that on your radar so you understood that. And then the last one is unclassified expenses. And remember, we created this last year in light of because of the pandemic and the unknown. So we created an account code here with $200,000. We increased our appropriated fund balance by $200,000. We didn't want to tax our taxpayers anymore. This would be coming out of our fund balance if we used it. And as you know, we probably used about that amount of money this year. Right now, I've just left 50,000 there for next year. I'm hoping it's really zero, but until we get that guidance that we're looking for, I still want to keep a little money in reserve just in case if we're having to continue with face coverings, to continue with bell covers on instruments, things of that nature, so that, you know, there's money there for those type of supplies that nobody is specifically budgeting for. But as you can see, overall, we're looking pretty good as far as we're seeing quite a few negatives. And that's why I say, wait till you see the whole picture before you get too concerned about the revenue side. Questions on anything tonight? So at the next board meeting, the idea is we'd be going through the principals' budgets, the curriculum's office budget, and then we'll look at the total budget, just see where the bottom line is. I'm not going to go through budget code. We'll just look at it in total.
We're not going back over these.
No, we're not.
I just wanted to say the one thing that from a board perspective, I just want to continue to put out there that I know that in the past, the board has looked at board docs as an option. I do think that COVID has really exposed some benefits of using technology for board docs. And I think from a communication standpoint, it came up briefly at a stakeholders committee meeting about just the quality of being able to search for information. So that may be something that, you know, we could bring it up on the agenda item for the stakeholders committee, but we may want to look at something like that. And this might be a time to look at it in terms of that section of the general support section.
Yeah.
Just an idea.
Next is good news. Does anybody have any good news they want to share?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep, just a note that the book fair continues to go on. It goes on through the end of the week. So just a reminder on that. And there will be one last story time session tomorrow evening. There's been a few of those already, which have been pretty well received, I think.
Did you tape, Albert, I hope? No.
I was very nervous, but it was super fun though. It was fun. I want to read more books. So if anybody has little people who need anyone to read, or I'll read a book to a big person. I had fun. So if you want a book read, hit me up.
I think they invented audible.com already. I think you might be, you know.
Yeah.
Jacqueline?
I just wanted to give a second kudos to all the fantastic artwork that was featured in the presentation tonight. I think that deserves its own good news shout out. It's really great.
Diane?
So this is going to take a little while, so I apologize for that, but not really. And I just think there's a lot of sadness in the world and a lot of bad news out there. So I really wanted to highlight some of the great things that are still going on in our district. And I know without being in the buildings, we're not seeing it. Parents maybe aren't seeing it as much, but I wanted to make sure we highlighted that. And Albert helped me reach out to staff and ask them to submit, some good news that they had. So I have 6 responses, and I'm really thank you, Albert, for facilitating it. And I want to thank our staff for sending some stuff in. But I want to take the time today to read some of the things that they sent. It was, really nice to read them, and I want to share them with everybody about some of the good things, big and small, but good things going on in our district. So bear with me. All right. So the first one is from our JV basketball coach. Just congratulating the boys on their win, and for all the basketball teams being able to be playing safely competitive games. It's wonderful watching them, the athletes playing a sport that they love during this challenging time, and thanking everybody for making that happen. And And then congratulating our 9th grade student, Layla Alam. She's won the Rhinebeck Responds Art Contest in the high school category for her digital art entry. And then a staff member who recently had surgery just wanted to share that during her recovery, how fellow coworkers sent meals, flowers, took out her garbage, brought treats for her daughter, her supervisor checked on her, and just how grateful she is to work in a district with such warm and supportive people. Then one of our teachers shared that during a much needed snow day, when it was warm and sunny, her class brought in their snow gear, or not a snow day, sorry, when there was snow, brought in their snow gear and made snow cones, created their own erupting snow volcano, science experiments, and worked together to make snowmen. And the best part, 3 of her 5 remote students were able to join in the fun as well. And then one of our other teachers shared about, we don't have field trips this year, but they were able to set up 2 virtual field trips. One was with a children's author, Tara Lazar, who zoomed in and read stories aloud to the children and then talked about her life as an author, and they were able to participate in a Q&A session. And then another field trip was with a reptile expert, and this is for a, I think, 2nd grade class. And the presenter showed monitor lizards, iguanas, geckos, turtles, tortoises, an 8-foot boa. And they tied this into a nonfiction writing unit, and it was an exciting experience for the whole class. And the last one is, and this ties in with Pat Sexton came to speak with us about the work of Aetna, and this is our 8th grade ELA class. They finished their project working with the artists from Aetna, and while reading Orwell's Animal Farm, they discussed the theme of equality. And they used a process called visual thinking strategies and the video platform Flipgrid. They presented their interpretation of equality in art to their classmates. They finished reviewing each other's work in a peer review process. And this is a project that students engage in critical thinking, thematic study, citing evidence, and speaking and listening skills. And it was an excellent project for the whole 8th grade. So those are some of the good news that was shared by our staff in the last week.
Great, Diane, thank you. Any other good news? Any old business? Opportunity for public comment? Any other? Mark?
We are actually supposed to cover this at our last meeting, but I didn't get my hand up soon enough for others, so I want to make sure I cover it tonight. We had the Dutchess County School Boards Association meeting on February 4th. There was an excellent presentation from 3 staff members from Wappenger's school district discussing communication strategies with the community and within the district. I got to try to get my hands on the slides from that, and I'll send those out to you. We also had a presentation from Dr. Hooley on the BOCES project. As Tom alluded to, there's been a delay in the project due to an issue with one of their contractors. So that may cause the beta site to have to be rented for a little bit longer, and so put the project a little bit behind. And then we actually had a visit from each of the BOCES board candidates. They all spoke briefly about their candidacy. And I just want to add, we should eventually have a discussion about who to nominate for the BOCES board. And then there was a little bit of discussion on the Capitol Conference that was held the week before that meeting. And the next meeting is going to be on March 4th, next Thursday. And there'll be a discussion about the state budget with someone from NYSBA's governmental relations staff.
Any questions for Mark? Move on to action items. Can I have a motion from the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to approve the following consent items?
So moved. Sorry.
Second.
All those in favor? passes. We have a motion upon the recommendation of the superintendent of schools to approve the request from Daniel Lavazzo, RHS High School, social studies teacher for the unpaid leave for the 2021-2022 school year.
So moved.
Second,
Any discussion?
Can I make a motion to table this to just be discussed in executive session?
So
second,
moved.
All those in
Second.
favor? That motion's tabled. We're going to move into executive session for collective bargaining discussion.
So moved.
second,
All those in favor? The motion passes.